Representing the government this morning is the Care Minister, Helen Whately. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. I want to talk to you about care, obviously a big topic this week. But first, can I just ask you about those migrant boats, as much as you know? Are you really going to try and turn them around?
Well, the first thing here to remember is that migrants travelling on those boats or other routes like that to try and get to the UK are, of course, desperate. But we also know that's a desperately dangerous way. They're taking a really perilous journey to come to the UK. So we want to deter people from embarking on that kind of dangerous journey. We also know as they do it, then that puts money into the people smugglers' pockets, those organised international crime gangs. So the big question is, what are the ways that we can do, the measures we can take to stop people getting into boats and trying to get here this way? And actually, we have a separate approach to try and enable safe routes to get here for asylum seekers. So the government has been looking at a wide range of options, but particularly working with the French. And for instance, an extra 54 million is due to go to the French so that they can put in place more border patrols and use more technology to try and stop people setting off in the first place.
Are we going to turn the boats around?
Well, I know the government looks at all the options, but I think a really important thing, of course, is you wouldn't want to put people in any greater danger. They're taking a dangerous journey as it is, and what we want to do is actually deter them from starting that journey in the first place.
Are we going to turn the boats around?
There's nothing more I can say to you on that beyond knowing that the government is looking at all the options.
Do you think it's a good idea?
We'd be right to do that. I think one thing that's really important,
because it's against the law, of course, isn't it?
One thing that's really important is to think about the safety. Actually, we want, we don't want people to have any more danger on a journey they're taking to get here than they need to. But overall,
but turning them around is not going to make it less dangerous.
What we want to do. Well, overall, what we want to do is deter people from taking that route. But actually, we do want to help people who are fleeing. For instance, the people we're helping come from Afghanistan.
Of course, I get that.
15,000 have arrived from Afghanistan.
My question is about the channel today.
Help.
Of course, and I get that, and it was a fantastic job done by the RAF, as all of my viewers will know. But it's against maritime law to turn boats around. So why is the Home Secretary even suggesting it?
So what I know is that the government, the Home Secretary, is, as you'd expect, I think, looking at all the options. It's desperately difficult. I'm a Kent MP.
Including illegal ones.
And I know that migrants are turning up on the beaches not very far from my constituency. People see them arriving on many a warm day. So, of course, we should look at what are the options and do what's best. I think the really important thing here is the work that we're doing jointly with the French and to support the French to actually stop people leaving in the first place.
OK, well, the French are saying, don't be ridiculous, you can't turn the boats around. So we'll wait and see what happens as far as that is concerned. Let's move on to the topic that's very close to your heart, NHS and social care, of course. Looking at the figures, and my team pointed out to me this morning that the social care cap will help just 5% of elderly people receiving care. Is that right?
Well, what we're doing is we are embarking on once-in-a-generation reforms of social care. And just give the context and remind viewers, I'm sure people know this, but governments for decades have talked about reforming social care, and we are taking this big step. And what we're doing with the cap, well, let me just say, so at the moment...
We know all of that. We've been talking about it for 3 or 4 days, so we're aware of the background. The question is it only helping 5% of people?
Well, that's not a number that I recognise.
OK.
What I can say is that we are putting in place that cap, which actually will give everybody peace of mind of knowing that whether it's somebody in their family or going to need care in the near future or in the longer term that you might need care, that the limit of the amount that you would need to spend on your care would be £86,000. That gives everyone peace of mind. And we know that at the moment, 1 in 7 people receive care have a cost of over £100,000 for their care. Also, as part of this, and this helps even more people, we're raising the means test, the safety net, at which you start getting help. So at the moment, you don't get help until you only have about £23,000 worth of assets. We're raising that to £100,000, so more people will get help soon.
OK, I'm never keen on talking numbers because it's a bit complicated in the morning when people are getting the kids ready for school, etc. But given that you brought up the 100,000, I'm told that the government, in fact, your figures, 1 in 7 people pay more than £100,000 for care. So that means 6 in 7 people don't. So what are you going to do for them?
So, firstly, to say the 6 and 7, they are worrying about it because you never know. So I don't know if you have any family members with dementia. Many people do.
Sadly,
I do.
All of my family members are dead, so no, sadly not.
I'm sorry, Kay. But many people do. And one of the worries there is the uncertainty. You just don't know how much care they're going to need and how long it's going to take. And therefore, you can't plan for it. So knowing what the maximum is does help people plan for bills that might come their way.
That's like, see, this is what you could have won. I mean, you know, 6 out of 7 people do not qualify for it.
I was just coming. So firstly, I think actually that peace of mind, and I know from my inbox as a constituency MP as well as Care Minister, this is something that worries people a lot. The other thing to say is actually more than half of the funding that we've just announced for social care through our big reform is actually to go into wider reforms of the system. So, for instance, more funding for local authorities to help them pay a fair rate for care. At the moment, people who are self-funding, paying their own bills, are often subsidising the people who have local authority-funded care, which is often at a lower rate. We're going to give more funding to local authorities so they can pay a fair rate of care. We're also going to be putting over 500 million into workforce training and development to really support our work. And the care workforce is just fantastic. Yeah. We want them to be more valued, have more training, more career development opportunities, and this will raise the quality of care for everybody too.
OK, you talked about care workers. There are, I think, 120,000 vacancies. How are you going to fill those?
Well, we have been working with the sector, with Skills for Care, which is the organisation which looks at the workforce particularly and works with government on this. In the short term, we have, for instance, been doing marketing campaigns promoting career care as a career. But we know that there is high turnover in the care sector. That's one reason why we're putting this huge amount of money, the 500 million I just mentioned, into a skills and development programme. I know from speaking to staff in job centres, one thing they say about people, and they talk about social care jobs, is, well, I don't see where the career will get me. I don't see a career path. So we want to build that kind of career path with opportunities for people to gain the skills and really feel valued in their work as they do it.
It doesn't help that you're forcing them to have double jobs if they don't want to.
I know this is a really difficult question. I mean, the situation here is, you'll know, your viewers will know, that care homes have had such a tough time in this pandemic, and that we have very sadly seen many residents in care homes die from COVID because they are the most vulnerable. It has to be the right thing to do, to give them the best possible
because they were sent home from hospitals when they had COVID because they weren't being tested in the early years of the pandemic.
This actually, and there's been lots of research done on that, and actually this wasn't the main source of COVID getting into care homes. The reality is that one of the best ways we can protect people living in care homes is through making sure that staff are vaccinated. Yes, the ongoing testing and staff are tested weekly is important as well. Sure. But vaccination is a really important part of protecting those who live in care homes. And now I've talked to whether it's residents themselves or the family members. They really want the family members living in care homes to have the most protection, and that's to be looked after by staff who are vaccinated. You
acknowledge, though, that that number, 120,000, that's just going to get worse, isn't it?
I know that the sector faces huge numbers of vacancies and that there is a large amount of turnover. But it's going to get worse in the short term because there's quite a lot of people who don't want to be vaccinated. Well, actually, already 90% of workers in care homes have been vaccinated. There's still time to get vaccinated. And actually, I'd say to anyone watching this today who hasn't yet been vaccinated, go and get the jab. For care workers, they've got until the 16th of September to have their first jab, and then still that gives time before November the 11th to have the second jab. So there's still time. Go and get vaccinated, and then you're both protecting yourself and those that you look after.
And what if they don't?
Well, it has to be the right thing to do. I know that there will be small numbers who don't. I mean, there are if someone has a medical exemption, a medical reason for not being vaccinated, well, that's a different matter, of course. But what about the others that don't? What will happen to them on the 11th of November? I mean, the big question has to be, well, if you don't want to get vaccinated, how can you continue? How can it be right to continue to look after people who are really vulnerable from COVID? So they will lose their jobs, and that will make the issue of how many people are employed and the number of vacancies in care homes even worse, yeah? I mean, it will. It's an actual fact, isn't it? But that is why we're working particularly... we know you acknowledge that, Minister, don't you? Yes, I acknowledge that in areas where... there are some care homes where the vaccination rates are lower. Some... good number have got actually 100% all of their staff are vaccinated, but that's not consistent. That's why we're working with local authorities, and local authorities in turn are working with care homes where the rates are lower to really help their staff have the confidence, if they haven't had the confidence to get vaccinated yet, to go and get that jab. Just to labour this point, and then we'll move on to others, there are 120,000 plus vacancies at the moment. That is going to get worse after the 11th of November because those who refuse to be double vaccinated will lose their jobs. Well, we'll see. We constantly see a level of turnover in care homes in the social care sector. Actually, that's one reason why we're doing this social care reforms, and as I mentioned, that big investment in the workforce, building up people's skills and the career path to try and reduce the constant turnover you see of people coming in and out of jobs in the care sector. We want to make it a long-term career. So that's the long-term direction of travel. What we're also going to see in the next few weeks is some people, for instance, coming off furlough, looking for jobs. So there is movement in the jobs market. And so actually there's a lot going on to make sure that care homes do have the staff that they need.
OK, but just to make the point, if on the 11th of November, people who are presently working in care homes don't have 2 vaccinations and a certificate to prove that, they're out of work.
Well, so the care home have to follow their own process. We've given guidance to the care homes about how to support staff through
you just
this.
Say yes or no, Minister. It is a yes or no question.
I mean, I think it's quite clear. Of course, I recognise that there will be a number of people who really, really don't want to get vaccinated, and the care home they're working for will be able to look and see whether they can work, for instance, not in a front line or not in the care home. But I know that those jobs, most jobs in care home are on the site, in the premise. And so for some people, continuing to work in a care home won't be the right thing for them. But this has to be the right thing to do to best protect those really vulnerable people who live in care homes and are most at risk from COVID.
How do you feel about NHS managers earning something like £275,000 a year?
Yeah, I've seen a headline on that today, clearly. I think taking a step back, people working in the NHS in those kind of roles are taking on a lot of responsibility. They're big jobs, and they're moving from having more senior managers in the NHS to fewer through doing this. The NHS reckons that it needs to have that level of pay to have the right people in those jobs. But I do think, and the government keeps a really close eye on making sure that NHS money is spent carefully and appropriately, because we want as much of the funding to go.
Funding?
Well, we want as much of the funding as possible to go to the front line. And for instance, for me,
I look at twice what you earn.
It is significantly more than I earn. So I don't want to see NHS managers being paid unacceptable levels. And the NHS does need to be very careful with.
Because you almost started by saying it was unacceptable, didn't you? And then
I completely recognise your reaction, the public's reaction, saying, goodness, look at that big number. Of course, we do want to have really top people taking on the responsibility, driving forward some of the reforms that we need in the NHS, getting down the backlog where we just voted through last night, 16 billion extra funding to help the NHS get through the backlog.
Level of responsibility that you've got, though, in your job, and, it's almost twice your salary.
Well, thank you for pointing out
it's true, though, isn't it?
What I do in my job. But, I think I wouldn't sort of compare them directly like that. It's a very different line of work. But, what I really care about is making sure right now we get all those backlogs down the NHS, all those people waiting, for over 5 million people waiting for operations, for treatment in the NHS at the moment. We voted through 16 billion more for the NHS last night to get down that backlog. We want the NHS to recover from the pandemic. Clearly, they are still looking after people with COVID as well, to get through this and make sure that we have the NHS always there for people when they need it.
Beautiful blue jacket on this morning. How do you feel about being called Blue Labour?
Actually, I think we made a difficult decision last night, clearly. And as a Conservative, voting for a tax rise, it's not something you do lightly. We want people's money to be in their pockets.
Does it sit comfortably with you, tax rises?
So, of course, I don't want us to raise tax, but we had a really difficult choice here. So at the moment, we've got over 5 million people on NHS waiting lists. That's projected to potentially get to 13 million. That could be about 1 in 5 people waiting for an operation. That's a terrible position to be in, coupled with, for me as Care Minister, we know we desperately need to do social care reform, and governments for decades have not been able to work out the way to fund that, to move that forward. So what we've got here is a package that means we can both treat all those people who need treatment under the NHS, and we can embark on those once-in-a-generation social care reforms.
Okay. It really is a very beautiful jacket. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you.